Welcome back to another episode of Joyful Mate. I'm your joyful journey mentor, Anthony Harcher, and it's a delight to share this topic with you today. It is an intro into the people-pleasing episode I did on my other podcast, Me and My Health Up, and I know it's certainly relevant to experiencing more joy is certainly breaking free from people-pleasing behavior, hence why I'm sharing this insight on Joyful Mate. So this prologue I'm sharing is just some insight into the episode. It is about understanding what people-pleasing is. Why does it happen? It's a form of attachment, and it comes from childhood. And then I share as to how you can break free of people-pleasing and how you can find yourself. Because the more we people-please, the more we lose ourself. We lose our self-identity. We lose a sense of self by people-pleasing. So this episode is understanding what people-pleasing is costing you in terms of losing yourself and becoming so scattered and putting on all these masks. And ultimately, by saying no and defining who you are and putting those boundaries in place, will really set you on a course of authenticity. And that authentic path is the most fulfilling and joyful path. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into this insights I'm sharing on people please, how it's costing you, what you can do about it, and how by you defining boundaries and who you are will help you be more authentic and ultimately help you find more joy and fulfillment. Seeking something, trying to find happiness. Are you always looking for approval, wanting someone to say yes and not being able to handle rejection? If this is you, then this episode is certainly for you. This episode is on people pleasing and understanding the hidden costs of people pleasing. And yes, you've landed on an episode of Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. I love this podcast because it's all about enhancing and enlightening your well-being. And I love doing it from a mind and body perspective. And in this episode, we're focusing on the mind because, as you know, the mind is connected with the body. What goes on in the mind influences what goes on in the body. So if you want overall wellness, you need to be looking after both your mind, your mental health, and your physical health. And this episode is focused on people pleasing and understanding what it's costing you from people pleasing. And certainly there'll be people out there listening that are not quite sure whether they're a people pleaser. So I'm going to discuss how you can unravel whether or not you're a people pleaser and once you're aware of it, then you can actually do something about it. So certainly, as you know, Health Up is a very practical and pragmatic podcast. It's about giving you tips and hints on how to succeed in all areas of wellness and well-being. So let's talk about people pleasing, and are you a people pleaser? And in essence, a people pleaser is someone that says yes to everything and struggles to say no. They'd like to say no because often when they say yes, they're thinking, oh, I don't really want to do that. And now I'm looking for a reason to get out of it, right? So if that's you, then yes, that's people pleasing. When you're looking for approval, seeking approval from others, asking them whether they agree or whether they approve or whether they're on board or what they think, all those sort of things, seeking approval is certainly, in essence, people-pleasing because you're looking for their approval to carry out or execute a certain behavior or to do something. And so, yeah, if you're a yes person or, always seeking approval or just wanting to fit in. So you're doing things to fit in, which is very much that saying yes to everything and not really considering whether it's something you want to do, but because other people are doing it or you think you should do it. So if you're thinking should or to, must, all those sort of things, then it's coming from somewhere else. It's not coming from within. It's not truly aligned to what you want to do. In essence, this podcast, I love doing this podcast. There's no one telling me to do this podcast. I'm not trying to people please anyone in doing this podcast. I'm actually recording this episode on a public holiday. So it's a delight to be doing this for you and enhancing your well-being because I love doing that. That's my mission. My purpose is to enhance and enlighten the well-being of others. So I live for that. And so if you're catching yourself and considering things that I should turn up to this function or it's something I should do or I ought to do it or I got to do it, those sort of thinking in your brain is you looking to fit in and please someone by saying yes, that you think that they want you there. But in essence, they could be just trying to be polite and make you feel that you're welcome, but they might underlying think that I don't really want you to come. I want you to say no. At the same time, you're thinking, yes, I want to say no, but I don't want to let you down. And therefore, it's a lose-lose situation. So this episode is helping you identify when you're in a people-pleasing mindset and how to, creating that awareness and then how to break free of that cycle of people-pleasing. So it's probably important to understand where it comes from. And it starts from childhood. It really does. It starts from wanting approval and seeking mum and dad's approval and acceptance because you want to belong, you want to feel connected, and it's a real survival instinct. So it ultimately comes from surviving, because as humans, we need one another in order to survive. We're not solo creatures. We are collaboratory social beings where we work together to achieve common outcomes, or, I guess common outcome is survival. So that's where it's wired in terms of that primitive wiring from early on, is seeking mum and dad's approval and acceptance so that you fit in. You're reliant on them to survive. You cannot physically fend for yourself. It's not like some animals where they're popped out and they're pretty much standing within, a day or two or within hours of being popped out. And so they're much more quickly able to survive without the support of their parents a lot quicker than what humans are. We actually need time with our parents in order to be able to survive by ourselves. And so it really comes back to that early days of wiring the brain and being in that survival thinking that I need my parents, I need their approval and I need their love in order to have a shelter, in order to be fed. And so we're constantly doing yeses to our parents. And then as we start to get older, we start to want and desire more independence. We want to find ourselves. With our parents, we're sort of, coexisting with them. As we age and we want to get more independent, we want to actually find ourselves and who we are and what we can contribute to the wider community, to the wider social network or social fabric. So that's, in essence, why we sort of start saying no, is we're wanting to find ourselves. And through our teenage years, we're saying yes and no. We've got a blend of yes and no's. We're in some ways realizing that mum and dad are still feeding us and providing shelter, and we want connection with them and the support in order to survive through them. And so we say enough yeses in order to stay connected with them and keep under the roof of mum and dad. Obviously, there's those children that can't handle that and really want the freedom a lot earlier, and every child is different and everyone grows at a different rate and everyone seeks that independence at a different rate. And so some children leave home really early. Some are forced to leave home, others choose to leave home. And ultimately it's them on that mission to find themselves and realize that they develop enough confidence within themselves to be able to, they can do it. They'll find a way. And so that really comes from how your parents have raised you, whether they've allowed you to find your soul, find your essence through allowing you to fail or allowing allowing freedom. So if you weren't given much freedom, then you become more dependent on your parents and you become more of a people pleaser. So if your parents were over supportive and gave you a lot, then there's not enough reason for you to want to seek something else because they're providing basically all the survival needs. Whereas your parents, said, you got to work out your own lunch or own dinner, then obviously you start finding ways to survive by yourself. And so it really depends on how your parents raised you, whether they were over supportive parents or they, actually gave you a lot of freedom and independence at an early age. If they gave you a lot of freedom and independence at an early age, you're more likely to leave home earlier and seek your own identity and find your own identity and thrive. Whereas those that spent a lot of time being over supported and nurtured and babied, so to speak, take much later. They find it much later in life. They look for it much later in life, well beyond their friends. Their friends are out flashing amongst one another where they're still living at home. So again, we all do this at different rates depending on our upbringing and our parents and how they wanted to raise us, and continue to say yes based on our desire to stay truly dependent on them, or we start to say no to start finding our own independence. And so that occurs at different rates. And so this is how we end up where we are in terms of whether you're in your 20s, 30s and 40s or 50s. Some people are still very much yes pleasers because that's how they were raised. That's all they know. That's their world. It's their reality is people pleasing. And hence why they don't like when people aren't doing that to them, because they think that's reality, that everyone should people please. And then that's tied up with social, I guess, norms, so to speak. So the social norms are about fitting in, about conforming. It's like the laws of the state or the laws of the nation. It's about conforming, fitting in. We saw it very much in that COVID period. There was people that were strongly aligned to fitting in and doing what the social norm was. And there was those that wanted their freedom, their independence, and they wanted to choose whether they got vaccinated. And they wanted that choice. So they aligned more with the anti-vaxxers, although they might not have been totally anti-vaccinations. They just wanted the freedom to choose as opposed to the government telling them what to do. So they didn't want to say yes to the government. They wanted their own, that freedom of choice. So that sort of brings me to, I guess, people that have migrated to Australia that very much dependent on staying in Australia. So they'll conform to the government's rules in order to stay. And that can create some sort of dependence on the government because you never wanted to return back to the war-torn country, so to speak, because that was so terrifying or traumatizing that you then develop this strong allegiance and alliance to the government and their way of thinking, and you toe the line because you don't want to get kicked out of the country. And that can become very much hardwired in your psyche. And then that hardwiring in the psyche can be then passed down to future generations. So again, there's so many ways in which this can come into the way in which we go about living life. Ultimately, people pleasing is a form of attachment, a form of dependence on someone else or something. Whereas obviously when we're not people pleasing and we're finding our own identity, we essentially looking to discover who we are and define ourselves. And in that process of defining ourselves, we start putting boundaries in place. We start saying no, whereas the people pleasers won't. They'll constantly allow people to interfere with, basically take over them in essence, or tell them what to do, and they'll just conform and toe the line. Whereas you got those that really want the freedom and that choice and the independence, and they don't want, and they're the ones that saying no, and they struggle to fit in. So I've very much been on my own personal journey in relation to this. So obviously I went through my childhood and very much reliant on my parents, but my parents gave me a fair amount of freedom and choice. And so I became quite dependent from an early age because I was given so much freedom. Whereas I know other people that I married into a family where they didn't quite have the same independence and freedom. And so they've developed a stronger attachment and dependence on the family. Whereas because I was given so much freedom and independence, I don't have as much as an attachment and dependence on the family. And so I see this play in our relationship dynamic in terms of how my wife wants to raise the children versus how because I was given lots of freedom. I want to pass that freedom to my children, and my wife was given not much freedom and she wants to give them a bit of freedom, but not too much. And it's playing that tango as to how much freedom and independence you give your children and how much support that you give your children. Ultimately, children and everyone will thrive when the support meets the challenge. And so the challenge is something new, something you haven't encountered, and obviously the support or the things that you know and known, that comfort zone. Obviously, when we step out of our comfort zone, we're going into an area of unknowns, an area of challenge. And stepping into that comfort zone is where we grow and develop more independence and freedom and choice. And in that unknown, as we explore that unknown space, as we go into that, we actually find ourselves. We find out who we are. What I've discovered more about myself in terms of stepping into business, because stepping into your own business, you haven't got the support of the company that you used to work for. And there was an element of dependence upon that company, and I would toe the line and I would be a yes person in order to stay employed with that company. Stepping into my own space gives me ultimately more choice and more freedom But with that is less security, more insecurity, more challenge, more stepping into the unknown. And so this is why some people stay stuck in the corporate world, is because they develop some dependence, and that dependence gets stronger over time, and they're less willing to take the risk of stepping into their own space and into a space of unknown, because in essence that's where we're super challenged and we can get quite comfortable being in a company environment. So companies, in order for us to stay employed, we need to toe the line. We need to say yes, we need to follow their rules. Whereas you step into your own space, you can create your own rules, and there's more choice and more freedom. However, it comes at a cost. You don't have the same security. So I think you understand that what is happening in this dynamic around people pleasing is it initially starts with survival mentality. We need it. We actually rely on one another. But then we eventually get very more knowledgeable. We become more independent because of our knowledge, our education, and we're starting to then wanting to flourish and starting to wanting to explore new, because in the exploration of life is that variety that we seek, because we get bored with the same old. And if you're turning up to the same job, the same people, that can become too comforting and not enough spice. And so then we either seek spice in the corporate, and we'll start to challenge the corporate norms because we're not, we're less attached to staying attached or dependent on that corporate. And we're thinking, well, I'm good enough to find another job. And so therefore you start challenging the company's lines and rules and things like that. And because you're becoming more confident in yourself, in your own ability to find something else. And that often, we seek that variety. That variety is driven by curiosity, and very much as a teenager, we're starting to explore that curiosity. We're starting to get curious about what it's like to be on by ourselves and fending for ourselves. And we have a desire to explore that, to step into the unknown and to feel it, because that's where the variety is. And that's where the spice of life is. And so you can really see how this entanglement happens. And we go on this tango and dance through dependence and attachment and people please. It's going to cost us. It's going to cost our relationships. It's going to cost us in terms of money, financial outcomes. It will cost us also in terms of our growth, our personal development. It's going to obviously cost us in terms of our ability to be able to stand out and to ultimately contribute in a greater way. Ultimately, it will cost you achieving your dreams, because when we have this dependence and this attachment and this people pleasing, we often will hold back on chasing our dreams because we're worried about what other people think and whether they'll approve of us. And ultimately, this is what my dilemma was when I was contemplating leaving corporate. Was the dilemma I had was, would I be, still have the approval of my parents, because I'm stepping into a space that they necessarily didn't encourage when I was leaving school. And so I was thinking, it's going to cost me my relationship with my parents. And I knew I was going to be challenged by my parents because it was, again, against what they viewed as the way in which you live life, in essence. And so I was willing to take that challenge because I had the support of Adriana, my wife. And so I had support through her. And I knew I'd be challenged through my parents, but that sort of balance, that mix, enabled me to explore the unknown, to be able to start detaching from that area that I thought was, in essence, people-pleasing, which was working in a corporate job, doing the corporate thing. So that ultimately wasn't where I was going to thrive. So I knew that, and hence why I stepped out, and I've never looked back in terms of it was, challenging, very challenging. And I think I've really grown a lot from taking that step away from people pleasing and having approval from my parents in terms of the career I was doing, and now doing something that I love doing and I can turn up on a public holiday to do. So what is it costing you in terms of relationships by people pleasing? Ultimately, what will happen in a relationship if you're people pleasing all the time, you're trying to just conform to how they want you to be. And so if you don't conform, so the behavior that it drives into you and the wiring in your brain is that if I do the opposite, they won't love me. And therefore, I'm going to keep doing what they want me to do. But it's not necessarily you. You're trying to be someone else in order to fit into that relationship. And so what that relationship of conforming and saying yes is costing you is you. It's costing you your identity. It's costing you your ability to thrive. And so what that can cost over time to you is it can create low self-esteem, low self-worth, because you lose who you are. You start to lose ultimately yourself because you're so wanting to do what others want you to do, as opposed to the things that are really true and deeply meaningful and purposeful to you, true to your soul, true to your spirit. So what we want the relationship to evolve as is that respect for one another of who they are and helping one another thrive in terms of who they are, as opposed to saying that this is the way you should do in order to win my love, in order to win my approval. Because when you place conditions around love, it's not true love. So there's no conditions around love. It's unconditional. So you love, ultimately, love is loving the person for who they are, not for what or how they do things for you or them fitting in with how you want them to behave. It's loving both sides of them. It's loving when they do the things that support you and also do the things that challenge you, because ultimately the relationship grows through that challenge. You've probably noticed that when you've had tough times and you've been most challenged in your relationship, it's prospered as a result of that. Or if it didn't, then it was meant to go the way it did in terms of in your own separate ways, because by staying together, you were both going to ultimately not thrive. You both were going to struggle and basically get down to that lowest common denominator of just holding things together by just doing enough people pleasers and yes sirs and no sirs, just to hold it together by a paper thin thread. Ultimately, you want the relationship to prosper, and that requires the balance between the challenging of one another and supporting one another. But it's finding that nice mix for one another and respecting one another for who each other is, as opposed to wanting them to be someone. So that's how it can cost you in relationships. It will cost you your identity, or you living the life that you want to live. That ultimately you'll be lost and you'll be regretful long term because of that. You'll start to develop resentment to that person, because that's the way you've chosen the relationship to evolve, through people pleasing. Ultimately, you want it to evolve through supporting one another and challenging one another, and ultimately being respectful for one another and allowing each other to be who they are, as opposed to you wanting them to be the person that you want them to be in that relationship. And ultimately, that comes from you seeing how your parents interacted, and that's how you think relationships are. Ultimately, you need to find the way in which how you want to be in a relationship, how you want to show yourself, how you want to show up, and you want that to be respected both sides. So it's a path of a journey of entanglement, of challenge, support, hard times, good times, but it's all together and it's all part of the growth of the relationship. In terms of what is it costing you in finances, well, if you're saying yes to clients or yes to opportunities that you don't really want to do or don't think that you have the capacity to do, then ultimately it's going to come at a cost, because you won't be able to service the customer well, and they are going to, have you're going to damage your reputation, and they're not going to use your services again because you didn't serve them well, because you just thought that that's the way you just take any business that comes your way, and you don't consider whether it's the right type of business and whether you have the ability to serve that growth or that new business. And so ultimately, we don't want to just say yes to every opportunity that comes our way, because what will happen is we'll get to spread too thin and we'll become exposed and we'll damage our reputation. So we want to accept the work that's really aligned to the organization's values and ultimately the strategic direction of the organization. But we don't want to take on any work because we're not specialists in that, and we ultimately not going to get the greatest result for the customer. So we want to do what's in the best interest of the customer and say no to the work that's not aligned in terms of our strategic direction or your strategic direction. So it can really cost you in terms of your vocation or in the area of work you are, by saying yes to everything, by thinking that that's the way in which you grow. Ultimately, that growth won't be the growth that you're seeking and eventually will result in reputational damage. It's the same as money or money opportunities, or where do you invest your money? If you say yes to every opportunity that looks flashy and sparkly, then your money, well, first of all, you're throwing money away in essence. It's not well considered as to whether that money's going to be aligned to whether you can get it back, or whether you can use it within a time frame that you want to use it within, or whether it's trapped up and locked up. And so ultimately we want to make decisions that are better aligned to our financial goals and not say yes to every financial opportunity, because there's always financial opportunities that will come on your radar. And so I think it's really important to understand what is most important for you in that point in time in terms of your financial goals. And that's going to change over time, but that's going to allow you to make better decisions in terms of saying no to financial opportunities if you have a financial plan, if you have a financial strategy. It's the same as, customers, taking on new customers. You've got to filter them as to whether they're aligned to what you're seeking and ultimately in the area that you want to grow. Because if they're not, then it's saying no. And so this is the same as relationships, is if your partner asks you to do something that you don't want to do, say no and be comfortable saying no, because it's ultimately you're not going to do it well. You're going to ultimately let them down because you're not going to do it as they want you to do it, because you're not them. They're going to have the expectation that you'll do it just like them. So really, this is in certainly the relationship part of things, it's really active listening and understanding where each person's coming from in order to evolve that relationship. Otherwise, if you don't understand why they're saying no, then you will feel rejected. But if you ultimately understand the reason why they're saying no, you'll have an understanding and better perspective and understanding as to why they're saying no. So it's really important that you know the direction you're going in. So you need to know yourself in order to be able to define your boundaries. But in order to start to know yourself, you've got to start to say no to things, because if you're constantly saying yes, you're scattered too thin and you'll lose touch with yourself, and you'll lose touch with what you want to do and what's truly important to you, because you're saying yes to everything and you're doing everything yes, yes, yes. And so you'll lose yourself in this process, and you'll struggle to then develop the boundaries that you need to put in place in order to define yourself and in order to find yourself. So the boundaries really define us. The boundaries really start to tell people who we are and let people know who we are. And so that then people can love the person that you are demonstrating that you are. So by saying no, if you're constantly saying yes, that you're like a chameleon, you're just trying to fit in. The person doesn't really know who you are. So by setting the boundaries, we define who we are, and we discover ourselves in that process, because it allows time to check in with ourselves. Was that a good decision? Did you feel comfortable with making that decision? What did you do as an alternate option as opposed to doing what they wanted you to do? Did that feel more aligned to your soul, your heart? If yes, then yes, it was the right decision. If no, and you're not quite sure, then again, at least you explored it. At least you tried something new. Ultimately, just saying yes all the time for the sake of people pleasing is just losing yourself in the crowd, getting lost in the crowd of what everyone else is doing. In order to stand out, we need to start saying no. We need to define our boundaries. And then we, start to find ourselves in that process, because we start to really get in touch with what inspires us, what lifts us up, as opposed to constantly just not knowing whether it's lifting you up or dragging you down. So say no, start defining who you are. If you've got a financial opportunity presented to you, start to assess it and start to think about what you want. What are your needs, wants? What are your desires? Is it aligned to that? If it's not, then it's a no. But start to consider things as opposed to just staying a spontaneous yes because you think it's going to make you lots of money. You're going to be a millionaire overnight, because most likely that doesn't happen. Ultimately, we need to keep the money invested in order for it to compound, because the way in which we make money is through compounding. It's the compound effect of money. So it's very hard to do quick entries in and out because you don't get the eighth wonder of the universe, which Warren Buffett, defined it as, and that's the law of compounding. And ultimately, that's where people make their money, is through that compounding effect. So jumping into opportunities and jumping out all the time, you're going to lose money. Ultimately, you might get some wins, but over time, if you keep doing it, there's probably going to be more losses than wins. So it's going to cost you financially. It costs you in relationships. It costs you in terms of your growth and development. It will cost you in business. It will cost you in your vocation, all these areas, because you're spreading yourself too thin. You're losing yourself. You lose your identity. You get low self-esteem, low self-worth, and then you don't know where to start climbing out of this mess. So the way in which you get out of it is start defining your boundaries. Start saying no to things that don't really excite you or inspire you. If they're just a meh or, sort of nah, we'll see. But there's no point also that saying yes and hoping something better pops up so you can give an excuse or something like that. Over time, that may be the way in which you do it, but over time you'll get more comfortable, more certain, the more you know yourself around your decisions, and you won't sort of say a tentative yes and then see if something better comes up and then give excuses. That's the way in which you sort of start this process generally. Obviously, if you find yourself very quickly and aligning yourself to your values, probably worth talking a bit about what's important to you. And it's the things that really give you energy, what sparks you up. So what are the things that you get invited to that you go to and you feel energized? So those are the things, or the confirmation to you to let you know that that was the right yes, that was the right invitation to accept. However, what are the things that you get invited to that you feel de-energized, that you get a sense that, you feel deflated? They're the ones that you should have said no to, okay? Ultimately, are the decisions where you would have been best to say no. So this can help direct you to decide, well, will this energize me? Will this bring me energy? Or will this take energy from me? Will it zap me energy? And if it's going to zap you energy, then it's a no. However, if there's other benefits of going, such as, for example, you can find something else that aligns to something else that's important to you, then you can start to think about all the benefits that you will get from going there to actually get a better perspective of what you're saying yes to. If you can't find them, ultimately, then it's probably a no. And this is a journey that you'll go on in terms of saying yes and no and working out the things that, yep, that was a good decision. Yep, I feel that what I filled my time with, other than going to the event that I could have went to, then if that was, I had a great time doing the alternative, then the alternative was the right thing to say yes to. And ultimately, when we say no to something, we are saying yes to something else, which you want to be aligned to what's important to you. So make sure the yeses are very aligned to what's most important to you, and the no's are the ones that distract you, that take you away from what's most important to you. So today, I'm saying no to being out and probably down the beach in the sunshine, and a yes to doing this podcast, to enhancing and enlightening your well-being, because I find that very fulfilling. That's my mission, my purpose. It brings a great sense of deep and meaningful connection with feeling that I belong in this universe, that I have something to add, I have some value to contribute. So they're the things that you want to be saying yes to more often, and no to anything that takes you away from that. No to anything that really distracts you. So I find it very easy to say no to events that are not aligned to my health value. I have a strong value on health, very important to me. And so any event that involves drinking at a pub, I'll quite happily and joyfully say no to it, because I know in that setting, it doesn't really resonate with me. But if it's an event that incorporates health, such as doing an activity, then I'll gleefully, joyfully say yes to it and do it. And it feels very aligned to who I am. So it's going on that journey of defining who you are through setting boundaries, but setting the boundaries in alignment with who you are. So you need to find who you are. You need to discover that. And the only way you can discover it is start setting boundaries. Start saying yes to the things that energize you and no to the things that zap you, that take energy away. I really hope that helps in terms of that boundary setting and defining who you are, because ultimately that will start you on that self-discovery journey. And then you'll make it, and it becomes easier to say yes and no to things because you know who you are. When you're finding yourself, you're experimenting and you'll come across things that you think, oh, I should have said no to that, but I said yes. And so that's a self-discovery. So don't be too hard on yourself. So that's really it in terms of this episode on people pleasing and how it's detrimental to you ultimately in all areas of life, and how it's costing you yourself, how it's costing you money, how it's costing you relationships by just trying to fit in and trying to please others and trying to be someone else that you are not. So go about being you and go on that self-discovery journey and finding you by saying yes to the things that energize you, no to the things that don't. And ultimately they might change over time, but it's really just allowing that transformation and really going on that self-discovery. However, certainly not saying yes to everything. It's really important because you'll lose who you are. You'll lose your self-esteem. You'll lose your self-worth, and ultimately can't identify with anything, and you just become lost in this world. So I hope this episode has really connected with you and resonated with you. Please share it with others that you believe that will find value in this episode. Stay tuned up for more insightful and exciting episodes of Me and My Health Up, and I look forward to continuing to enhance and enlighten your well-being.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me and My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me and My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me and My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me and My.